Hello everyone, welcome to our audiobook channel. If you enjoy this story or want to hear more exciting content, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your feedback helps us improve and bring even more captivating stories. Enjoy listening. Dark Nightmares: A Journey from the Supernatural to Hell, a book about the most difficult journeys in life and death are underground. No blackmail is as gruesome as blackmail from an angel. A quick calculation is often made in carrion luggage. Once considered inhumane and now abandoned, this zoo may not be as empty as it seems. A bad marriage, a murderous couple, and part of a larger movement. There is no sign of life on an abandoned freighter, but what remains below decks tells a strange story. The origins of our species are not what we think. In the extreme, the future of revolution and mass murder is so bright. Your memories may not be your own, and your life nothing more than a ritual that forces you to commit a brutal act on all London Underground lines. There is a good service running on all London Underground lines. There are too many of us down here. Excuse me, a voice cracked by age says to my left, and a face with dirty teeth is turned towards me. No. Not now. Please. Can't you see him in a hurry? The smile I show the woman becomes a grimace. I think him showing too much gum, like her. I was wondering if you could tell me which way to the Piccadilly line, she says. Her hair is brittle, the perma carapace of dead coral that could be snapped off. Her face is deeply lined, as if it's been put through a pane of glass. I doubt there is any blood in that head. No makeup either. She's really let herself go. This London lifestyle is hard on people, all the rushing about underground with long hours of pressure and stress between journeys, impossible aspirations for professional advancement in this recession, the ambition to find the right partner and start a life, the need for peer approval, status, glamour, fulfillment. It makes them all mad, then mummifies them. Once the hair's gone all wiry like this, with tufts of grey and odd patches of orange mixed in, sprouting like the trees on a model railway, it's all over for a woman too. Then they're just slow nuisances down here asking for directions. I'm too thick-headed with dehydration to think of anything to say to her or even to form words into a sentence. Inside I'm dry, my joints are stiff and my muscles ache. I need to sleep more. I forget what it was she asked me. Thoughts of bottled water I can buy from a concession at Victoria Station spur me on towards the end of the platform. A page from a free newspaper catches on my shin, clings and flaps at the same time. Makes me kick that leg out. It won't come off. I turn around and it slides down and over my shoe. The woman speaks to another man. Excuse me. He is sitting down, bent over his lap on a bench at the rear of the platform. He doesn't move. Maybe he's asleep. I suddenly remember her question. Central Line eastbound, I call to the woman. To Holborn. Change there. All I can see in her expression is incomprehension. She wants to tell me something. Her question was just a ruse. How can a face be so grey? She returns to her position beside the intercom where passengers can call for assistance. She presses the green button. No one answers. I don't think the service is working. I have a vague memory of pressing that green button myself a long time ago, but no one answered. Excuse me, she says into it. From my position on the Central Line eastbound platform at Oxford Circus, I can see the queue for the Victoria Line southbound has already begun in the distance. The delay on the Victoria Line must be colossal if they are all waiting on this platform. I could just fall to my knees and weep. When I get closer to the queue, I am confronted by a wall of slumped shoulders. Are all of these people hoping to reach the distant platform promised to them on the stained direction board above their bowed heads? It's hard to tell if they are standing still or shuffling forward 1 inch at a time. And how long have they been waiting to ascend anyway? I'll have to take the Bakerloo line to Embankment and then pick up the Circle line to Victoria. If I don't, at this rate, I'll be hopelessly late for work. Again, I can just squeeze up the side of the staircase. None of the pale faces in the crush even turn to look at me. They are committed to their immobile, futile yearning upwards. A smell hangs about the crowd, like old clothes left in airless spaces, and something else, the sweetish, hormony smell of spoiling meat. At the top of the staircase, I duck into the tunnel, forking left, and head for the next staircase, which should lead to the Baccaloo line. I follow the curved roof, discolored like a long empty swimming pool, and arching over a scattering of figures that appear to have come to a halt under the flickering striplights. They are moving, but not progressing, as if lost. Confused, perhaps. No time to find out. Fuck them, I have a train to catch. I duck to miss the wires hanging through an aluminium mesh. Surely that is not safe. I wipe the face of my watch and check the time, 9:15 a.m. Shit. Damn. I have 15 minutes to be at my desk. Not going to happen. I have at least 20 minutes underground ahead of me, and then a 15-minute walk from Victoria to the office. At this rate, I'll be lucky if I'm in by 10. My chest is tight with so much frustration. I've given myself indigestion or heartburn. I feel weak. When did I last eat? The air is hot and thin in the tunnel housing the second staircase. I can smell sweat and something like old curtains ruined by damp in a garage that I once investigated as a child. At the foot of the stairs, a small woman gets in my way and brings me to a sighing halt. She is trying to lift a suitcase on wheels to the next step. The terrible smell is coming out of her case. Ordinarily I would stop and help, but I am in a rush and can't waste a moment. With tight thighs I climb the second flight of stairs and enter a connecting tunnel. This leads to the Baccaloo line platforms. The lights are so dim in the tunnel I bump into someone coming the other way. Neither of us apologizes and we both rush on, but I can still feel the impression of his bony elbow against my ribs as he can feel mine in his. Temporarily bewildered by the collision and bad light, I tread on something that crunches beneath my foot. Looking into the silty shadows, I see a shape huddled against the wall. I stepped on its leg. I see a flip-flop and some kind of robe extending across the floor from the side of the tunnel. But whatever I stepped on with my entire weight made the sound of a handful of breadsticks being snapped in half. I look down, wince. Sorry. Does the head wrapped so tightly in the dirty scarf look up at me, or is it not bothered in the thin light? I'm reminded of a balloon I once covered in wallpaper paste and stripped of newspaper at school before painting it. Within days the balloon was punctured and removed, leaving a dry, hollow head behind that I didn't want to take home with me, and was glad to see crushed into a bin that smelled of orange peel and pencil shavings. This head doesn't have defined eyes either. They look papery and flat in their sharp-edged sockets. But something moves under the robes. An arm extends, I think, and then drops to the grubby tiles upon which the figure sits. The hand clatters as if it is holding dice. At the end of the tunnel, the platform marked Baccaloo eastbound is thick with commuters who don't seem to be making much progress into the waiting train. I assume they wait for people to alight from the carriages. Vanilla light leaks from within the stationary train carriages and glows between the crowd's motionless forms. Against the grimy windows the heads of those passengers lucky enough to be seated at this time of the morning are visible. Some of the heads are dipped to read newspapers and books, or to just look away from all of those crammed around them. Who wants the sudden glare of a stranger's eyes in the enforced cohabitation of a tube carriage? I shuffle into a gap in the crowd waiting on the platform, make my way around the edge hoping to see a chink in the bodies through which I can squeeze close to a carriage door, but I can't get nearer the train because each open door is encircled by a ring of immobile people looking for a similar opportunity to get on board. No one seems to be alighting and there is no room on board for any more bodies. Standing before the open doors, the passengers inside the train look out in silence. No one meets anyone else's eye. Passengers are reminded to keep their belongings with them at all times. The announcement is repeated twice before I lose patience and ask the man closest to me, "What's up?" But then I see the trickle of a white wire trailing from his ear and disappearing inside his overcoat iPod. His overcoat has seen better days, and I wonder why he doesn't brush the dandruff from the shoulders. Due to a person under a train, the Jubilee line is suspended in both directions. Maybe there is a knock-on effect to the Bakerloo line. I know how a terrible momentum of malfunction can spread down here. I turn around and catch the eye of a young woman. I raise my eyebrow and shake my head, the familiar sign of the thwarted London Underground passenger. But her face remains blank, and her skin is in a bad way, and it would be rude to stare for any longer than I already have. She wants no parley anyway, just wants to get going again, and is standing still, with all of the others quietly willing the Bakerloo line trains to move again. I look to the digital display to see what that has to impart. It reads no smoking at all in any part of the station. Then it changes to inform us that the next train bound for Elephant and Castle is 7 mins away. Oh, enough of this. I can't stand here for hours staring at a stationary train. This one will have to go, and when the next train arrives, everyone already clustered at the edge of the platform will get on first. I'll have no chance. I bump and sidle and squeeze my way through the silent, fixated crowd and go back into the tunnel to check progress on the Victoria line. Maybe the crush will have cleared by now. Back inside the darkened connecting tunnel, 3 indistinct figures are walking very slowly in front of me and abreast of each other so that no one can pass in either direction. Tourists, no doubt. No etiquette. Ambling in rush hour, unsure of where they are going. Just blithely unaware of the needs of those who actually work in the city. Walk on the left, for fuck's sake, in single file. The whole system would fail if we all took this attitude. I try to step around them but end up on my toes, overbalancing and clipping the heels of the figure on the left. She must be infirm or elderly, because the merest touch of my toe against her heel makes her stumble forward. She raises her arms on either side of her hunched body, like she's trying to keep her feet on ice. Have I hurt her? Is it a woman, with those thin legs ending in some kind of white sports shoe? She's wearing a skirt too, I think. It's hard to see. The other 2 stop and turn their heads to the side to watch their companion totter like a child taking baby steps away from a parent's hands. They say nothing. Sorry. Please. Excuse me, I say, but the 2 upright figures don't react beyond turning their faces, that I cannot see properly, towards me. I sense animosity within the silhouettes of their heads, or defiance, and possibly outrage at being rushed. Am I being inconsiderate or unnecessarily aggressive? I pause to examine my behavior. But then they all start milling about on the spot as if the interruption or change in direction is disorientating for them. One of them looks at the ceiling as if trying to remember distant events in its life, and sighs. With slow and deliberate movements, they seem to spread further apart, while still leaving no easy way through. I reach out to help the figure I have knocked aside. Sorry, I say again, but I quickly pull back my hand when my fingers encircle something hard but no thicker than a flute inside the thin sleeve of a blouse. And even though the tunnel is only illumined by the ambient light spilling from the Bakerloo line platform, I am sure the figure I have touched has just bent forward at the waist and tried to bite my retreating hand. I hear the sound of something clacking, like 2 domino pieces in a wooden box. I step away. All 3 of them have turned to watch me. You're walking 3 abreast in rush hour. Jesus. I push through them and continue on. Behind me, there is a moan, a shuffle of clothing, and then a slapping sound like the palm of a hand on a ceramic surface. Back there someone is moaning too. I turn around at the end of the short tunnel and peer back, guiltily, into the darkness I have emerged from. Against the distant semicircle of white light at the far end of the tunnel, I can only see one of the figures standing upright. Its head is tatty, like an old man with unkempt hair grown long at the sides. I go past the squat woman with the big suitcase on wheels. Her luggage is still on the first step and she's just staring at it now. Tough shit. Why bring something that size down here? I'm supposed to put my back out heaving it up the stairs. Those cases are always heavy enough to be carrying an anchor or an anvil. You might be on holiday, but some of us have to get to work, dear. The crowd eager to get on the Victoria line southbound are still as they were when I passed them minutes before, still huddled together, with their heads lowered. The wedge of bodies stretches from one side of the staircase to the other. The only difference I can spot now is that they are packed even tighter together, and a sense of brittle impatience has risen to the point when someone will soon start shoving. Maybe I should return to the Bakerloo line east platform and walk to its farthest end. Why didn't I think of that before? At the far end of that platform I will be able to cut through to the Victoria line southbound, and then arrive on the opposite end of the platform to the crush on the stairs here. I turn about and re-enter the darkened tunnel. Mercifully, there is no sign of the three old figures I confronted. And anyway, in the lightless tunnel, they will not recognize me as I pass. But halfway along I become aware of voices close to the floor, a muttering. I look down, and in the thin light I see the suggestion of a group of bodies huddled together and moving slowly. They are pressed against the wall and on all fours, groping forward as if searching for something that had been dropped. Nothing has changed back on the Bakerloo line platform either. The crowd of thwarted commuters standing about the open doors of the stationary train has not moved. Those I brush past at the rear of the platform mumble and totter. Inside the carriages, the same indifferent faces stare out of the same open doors, arrogant as if they are members of a superior social class because they are actually inside the train, while those on the platform can only look in at them with envious eyes. No one inside the train moves at all. They are perfectly motionless but still expectant, like mannequins, disheveled parodies of people in formal working attire standing under the dusty yellow lights of a warehouse. All of the benches at the rear of the platform are full of those tired of standing. Some lean into their neighbors, mouths open, eyes vacant. With no room on the seats, I am soon stepping over those sitting on the dirty tiled floor. Men in two-piece suits sit with their legs thrust out, socks showing, laces undone. They have such thin ankles. Scuffed briefcases are clutched by white fingers. Ahead I can hear the monotonous beat of a drum, a sound too hollow and feeble, like something old and worn in the music room of an impoverished school. A busker makes the noise. He stands at the mouth of the interconnecting tunnel from the Bakerloo line south to the Victoria line south, no doubt getting in everyone's way. An elderly man stooped over. He wears a black overcoat that once complemented a smart suit. His feet are wrapped in dirty bandages, and he steps from one foot to the other in time to the beats of a stained tambourine that he strikes with a wooden peg. His hands resemble cold chicken with see-through skin. The knuckles are so swollen I doubt he could manage anything but the hopeless banging of the wooden stick against the tambourine. What I can see of his head is the purple color of a hairless baby mammal, save for a crown of white wisps at the base of his skull that tendril over the collar of his overcoat. It must be the light that discolors his skin or alcohol. An enameled mug is positioned before his shuffling, side-to-side stepping feet. I peek inside and see the dull brass of a twopence coin. Ahead of me in the connecting tunnel, a group of scruffy people walk in a rocking side-to-side fashion. They barely move forward, as if they are caught in the busker's primitive rhythm. I fall into the same pattern of steps, and then wrench myself out of it, feeling hateful. I strike out for the end of the tunnel, pick up my pace until I am nearly running to the Victoria line platform. The drumming follows me. Under the arch to the Victoria line platform, a figure is slumped on the floor. Looks like a woman has fainted. I can't see much beside a hand, liver-spotted with age. It trembles. Her body seems to be shivering too, or is she crying? I don't have time to stop and check, and there are two people bent over her anyway, talking to her, so she is being looked after. As I rush past the commotion, the Samaritans sound as if they are making the cooing sounds of people feeding their pets. Passengers are reminded to stand behind the yellow line. The Victoria line southbound platform is crammed with commuters at this end too. Every one of them has turned their head to the left and is staring into the dark tunnel from which the train will come. Their mouths hang open and are as dark inside as the tunnel they watch. They must all be hoping to see the distant headlights of the train and are desperate to feel that sudden unnatural wind against their unsmiling faces and to hear the distant scream of the tracks while static snaps beneath their souls. There are far too many people on this platform for it to be safe. As I squeeze down the rear of the platform, I have a sense that a few figures have dropped from the edge and onto the tracks. It must be an illusion because I hear no sound of them landing on the gravel and rails below, and those figures that appeared to topple didn't even flail or put their arms out. Everyone here must be worn out by the weight because no one is talking at all for the entire length of the crowded platform. I look up in desperation at the electronic information board. The glass could do with a good clean because the amber letters and digits are hard to make out under the dross. Eventually I figure out its information: all stations to Brixton 1 MIN. I wait for a lot longer than 1 minute, my head turned to the left, with all of the others staring at the black mouth of the empty tunnel. I wait long enough for my neck to ache and for someone to faint further down the platform. I hear what sounds like a sack full of sticks rattling to the floor. There follows a brief commotion as if the fainter has taken at least 3 people down with them. My eyes start to burn and smart and I have so little energy I do wonder if I should just stand here for a while longer and try to regain some strength. Due to a signal failure at Blackfriars, the district line is suspended in both directions. Passengers are advised to seek other forms of transport. I close my eyes for a while. My chest tightens, my teeth grind. I need to make a call to the office to tell them that I just can't get through. I'll have to go up to street level to get a signal on my phone. And in getting nowhere here, it's time for a change of plan. The Northern Line. I need to get out of this station and walk down Oxford Street to Tottenham Court Road Station. From there I can travel south on the Northern Line to Embankment and pick up the Circle Line to Victoria. I bump my way from the Victoria Line platform, apologizing quietly as I go, but no one acknowledges me. I re-enter the tunnel between the Victoria and Bakerloo lines. The busker is still stepping from side to side on his dirty cloth feet, and those in the tunnel seem unaware that they are performing basic imbecilic dance steps to the beat of his filthy tambourine. I sidewind through them, and then rush through another arch that leads into another tunnel that also seems to have problems with its lights. These flicker, cut out, then sputter back to life for a few seconds. I look up and spot a sign that says WAYOUT. A tall blonde woman strides out of the darkness toward me. She is wearing a tight-fitting suit. The tipped heels of her stilettos click like a staccato that fills the tunnel and echoes beyond it. Even in the unstable light I can see the definition of her sharp bone structure and the imperious cast of a face set with a purpose no greater than self-importance. Some eye candy nonetheless, and something to relieve this interminable search underground. I get ready to discreetly admire her before she strides away. As she draws level, the flickering light strikes her. But under closer scrutiny she is not the young firefox that I presumed she was. With that posture, that chin held so high, those cold beautiful eyes, that tight tapering skirt, and those feet mounted on pedestals with heels like blades, how could I have been so wrong? Her hair is not blonde but white, the dead white of the pantomime wig. That haughty catwalk face is actually more like a skull too, with aged parchment stretched across it, a dry surface freshly painted with a palette more suited to the circus clown than the city girl. Appalled, I peer closer and see a shriveled ear, a neck loosely papered with brownish skin. She must be some kind of drug addict or former vamp with an eating disorder, because I have never seen legs so thin. The manner in which her bracelets clatter about her bony wrists is disquieting. The suit she wears was once chic but is now a dirty relic, and she must have recently sat in something foul, because the scent of things left forgotten in the moist spaces beneath old houses drifts from her stained clothing. And that wig, or whatever it is that she has upon her mottled head, smells of something recently burned. The woman teeters down to the drummer, and before I turn my head I suffer the illusion that she has thrown her thin arms into the air, as if with joy, and shaken that terrible head about. I'm so tired now my breath is too loud about my own head, and if I don't drink water soon I am sure I will hallucinate and then faint. I think of the shriveled organs of pharaohs inside canopic jars up at the British Museum. That's what my insides must look like. Due to a security alert at Barons Court, the Piccadilly line is suffering severe delays in both directions. Illuminated signs read WAYOUT all the way to the broken escalators. A loosely assembled crowd stands and stares upward in disbelief at the motionless iron stairs. Halfway up there is a seated figure surrounded by bags. He's either collapsed or sat down with exhaustion and isn't moving at all. You see a lot of that down here. Beside the escalator, a temporary sign indicates that we should please use the stairs, referring to the adjacent spiral staircase ascending to street level. There is an additional warning that 139 steps will have to be climbed to leave the underground by this route. I then double and place my hands on my knees. Can my journey get any worse? And this is not the first time this has happened. I have lost count of the times this scenario or a similar one have repeated themselves. The infrastructure seems to have collapsed in this city, and yet we still pay these prices. I begin my ascent slowly, with one hand clutching the cold rail on the inside of the staircase. With a monotonous and solemn slap of feet, a stream of people descend from above. Others join me in my ascent and stand too close behind me, as if to hurry me upward. Round and round we all go. I mostly look down at my shoes, which need a good clean and polish. The toes are scuffed like the shoes of a schoolboy who kicks stones about a building site. Even this exhausted and thirsty and tired, I'm still able to feel shame at how I've let my footwear go. But with all of this travelling and the hours I work, I don't have the headspace to even engage with such chores. And when I do look up, the grey and miserable faces and the expressions so long with worry that solemnly bob down the spiral staircase towards me just lower my spirits even further. Why do we go through this? Have we forgotten what quality of life is? No one is smiling on the stairs. I stop a few times to get my breath, and there are moans of irritation from those close on my heels. Inside my suit, my back is wet with sweat. It is the last of my body's moisture leaking out. Little white dots speckle my vision. I feel dizzy. It passes. When I eventually reach the top of the staircase, I trip over my own scruffy feet and stumble into the gassy yellow light of the station entrance. Can I not even walk in a straight line anymore? The ticket office is in darkness and I can't see the station assistants. On the other side of the turnstiles, a thin, bald man feeds coins into the ticket machine. He watches the coins ejected into the refund slot and is mesmerized by the sound of a seaside amusement arcade. He feeds the coins in again. The shoes he is wearing are far too big for his feet. They are a tan color and clash with his navy suit. They have either come from a different decade or have been taken from another man's feet. A long queue has formed behind him. A woman looks over his shoulder and bites her bottom lip, as if impatient to see what it is he has won from the machine. A thick huddle of commuters stand at the foot of each of the two staircases leading up to street level. They are silent, but I can tell they are impatient by the way they stretch their necks upwards and by how their mouths hang open. I swipe myself through the turnstile and go and join the back of the crowd. What now? I say out loud and surprise myself with the volume of my own voice. No one is listening to me. At the top of the stairs the steel grille is down. An emergency measure designed to regulate the flow and volume of crowds when too many people crowd into the station during rush hour. There is a large crowd up there. Between a backdrop of dark sky and the people on the stairs queuing to leave the station, the silhouettes of many heads are visible, close together. Pale fingers press through the grille from the other side. Commuters are trying to get inside the station. They have raised their arms to hang onto the gate. I pause to marvel at how dark it remains outside long into these London winter mornings. I thought the sun would be up by now. But this is just hopeless. No one can get in or out of this station here. I march across to the ticket office. Nothing clearly visible behind the glass of either counter. There might be someone in the chair. I'm not sure. Maybe someone in the murk, slumped over or looking at the floor between their legs. Look, I need to get to Victoria. Is anything working today? I notice the sign for position closed at the foot of the glass screen. I return to the turnstiles. In the free newspaper stand, a few yellowing copies of the Metro remain. Recession enters 18th year, shouts the headline. Those must be weeks old because I remember that headline a long time ago. Or do I? Maybe it was something very similar. I swipe myself through the turnstiles, run to the broken escalators descending to the Victoria line southbound. I clatter down the steps, losing my balance just before the bottom to knock aside a sign informing people to use the stairs. I'm going to have to find some water. I take a different tunnel that promises to deliver me back to the Central Line platforms. Central Line West will bring me out at Marble Arch. I can get any number of buses from there to Victoria Station. Inside this tunnel is a cleaner, a tall, spindly man in a luminous bib pushing a mop at the floor. He's cordoned off the affected area with a barrier of canvas tape stretched between 4 plastic poles. Someone has dumped a pile of rags in a London underground tunnel. Or perhaps this is the nest of the homeless, one recently abandoned. The tube mice are certainly active about it. Scraps of food have been left inside the rubbish. My mouth fills with saliva. A woman in high heels leans over the barrier tape. Her head is bowed and the thin wrist that emerges from the sleeve of her suit jabs a bony hand at the grubby pile on the tiles as if she has spotted something of value. I rush past them. Who has the time to mess about like this on their way to work? The lack of urgency down here never ceases to amaze me. I just wish everyone would damn well step aside. Their thoughts and movements are as slow as the transport service we've all come below to use. Like this fellow here, drumcat this time. On all fours and dragging that dirty sheet of cardboard behind him. Stand up straight, man, tuck your bloody shirt in. The chap ahead of him is moving much faster than me, and he's on crutches. Swinging those wooden poles back and forth and moving like he's on stilts. But when a man has lost that much hair on top, he really should get his hair trimmed at the sides. The top of his head looks like a greasy eggshell with freckles, fringed with that wispy stuff that hangs off tree branches in swamps. He makes me shudder. At the end of this passage the lights are out in the arch. Something rushes across the mouth of the exit and catches a bit of the flickering illumination from the one working strip light. Disorientation must account for what I think has crossed the arch. Something moving on all fours, quick as a dog, thin as a greyhound. Couldn't have been a dog. There had been a tie about the wizen throat. At the Central Line eastbound platform I'm exhausted. My feet burn, my throat is cracked. I doubt I can speak. A few others seem to be taking time out on this platform. They are all packed onto the benches. They've had enough. Anyone can see that. They can barely sit up straight, and those that are able to keep their spines upright are just resting their heads against the dirty walls, eyes closed, mouths open. In this dim brownish light they resemble the inhabitants of an ossuary under a cathedral, or something the Allies found at the end of the war, piled behind barbed wire. I put my briefcase on the floor beside a crowded bench and sit upon it. I'm too tired to feel any shame at sitting on my ass like this, as if I'm some kind of crazy art student. I laugh out loud. It echoes. My briefcase could do with being replaced too. I can see the metal frame poking from 2 corners. The case was a present. A shoelace has come undone. I don't have the strength to tie it. I just need to sit here and get my breath back. Close my eyes. Calm down. Something brushes my face. I snap awake, sticky eyelids tearing apart. Surely I couldn't have seen a shape slipping over the edge of the platform to the tracks. So whoever just touched me must have made off pretty quick down a side tunnel. Did I miss an announcement? My head feels heavy and my neck aches. Due to overcrowding at Finsbury Park, we have severe delays in both directions on the Victoria line. The directional board is still promising a train to Ealing Broadway in 1 minute, like it was when I got here. I'm pretty sure a train pulling up would have snapped me out of a doze. No one has moved from the bench. I get to my feet, reminded of how the suppleness has gone from my knee joints. The billboard on the other side of the platform is advertising mineral water, and even though the giant bottle of water on the poster is so stained by soot that it looks undrinkable, it still makes me groan at the idea of liquid passing my lips. To my shame, I even shake an old can of Coca-Cola that I spot under the bench. But the tin is as dry as the skin of the chap sitting above it, who seems to be just as puzzled by the same crossword clue that he was staring at when I sat down a couple of minutes ago. I pass through the short interconnecting tunnel between Central Line platforms eastbound and westbound. There is a good service running on all London Underground lines. Oh, at last. Maybe we'll all get somewhere now. The morning's service has been a damn disgrace. I pull back the sleeve of my overcoat to check the time. Jesus, I must have rubbed the cuff of my shirt sleeve against something filthy. When I wipe the face of my watch and check the time, I see that it's already 9:15 a.m. That gives me 15 minutes to be at my desk. Not going to happen. No chance. I'll be bloody lucky if I get there for 10. The Angels of London. Still a little surprised such things were tolerated in the city, Frank stared at the mess. At the base of the lamppost on the street corner, rubbish bags spilled their entrails across the pavement. Someone had once dumped a bin bag. Others followed their example until a pyramid of refuse rose up the lamppost to waste height. The core of the structure had since rotted, as if the body of the king that the pyramid honored was poorly embalmed. A mattress had been thrown against the pile too. Rusted springs were visible and watermarks formed continents on the quilted fabric. Now a broken pushchair, with canvas rags hanging from the aluminium frame, augmented the installation. A disturbing element of squalor and human fragility, something London's occupants became immune to or a part of. He wasn't sure which of the two paths he would follow, indifference or collaboration. He thought of submitting the entire mess to the Turner Prize, but never had the energy to smile at his own joke. And he had no one to share it with. Above his head the pub's sign creaked. It was wooden, the mounting of iron nearly rusted through. He wondered how long it would stay up there. It was amazing how many old and broken things just kept going in the city. The actual picture of the Angel of London was painted on the wood inside the corroded frame. The paint had weathered and given the picture a wholly different aspect from the one originally intended. With its scala-looking face, tight skullcap and wreath of leaves, the angel now resembled something Francis Bacon might have painted. Whenever Frank saw the hideous peeling face, he knew he was home. The pub was dead, had been closed for years. Through the grimy window panes he could see the silhouettes of wooden chairs placed upside down upon tables, a bar that resembled an unused plinth inside a dusty tomb, and a poster for a long-expired competition connecting rugby to Guinness. Indicating a high turnover of tenants in the rooms upstairs, a mass of uncollected post was slung upon a shelf inside the door next to the bar. Why was the old post not forwarded to past residents, or did the current tenants operate a willful resistance to the outside world? Few of his questions about people in the city were ever answered. There was no post for Frank. Someone was taking his mail, not even junk reached him. After 4 months as a tenant in a room above the derelict bar, Frank acknowledged that he was vanishing from the world entirely, becoming a thing withered, gaunt and grey, shabby and less substantial. Anxiety about money, finding the right kind of work, his future, isolation, all of it was intent on reducing him to a ghost, and one that only a few dimly remembered. He wondered if his image in photographs was disappearing too. If he didn't find a better job and get out of the building, he imagined himself disintegrating into a stain on the murky wallpaper of his wretched room. Had already disappeared from the social radar of his two friends. A relocation to London to catch up professionally still hadn't landed him a job anywhere near the film industry. His plummet to the bottom had been immediate. London had golden rules. Never take the first accommodation you view, but he had done so because the room above the Angel in Dalston was the only place he'd found on Gumtree at £100 a week, all that he could afford. Never take the first job you're offered, but he had done so because the £1,000 he came to town with was gone in a month. He worked security in Chelsea on shifts which was nowhere near Dalston. Poorly paid jobs for the semi-skilled were plentiful, but affordable accommodation in the first 3 zones was scarce enough to not exist. Frank wearily made his way up through the dimly lit dilapidation to his room. Familiar smells engulfed him: damp carpet warmed by radiators, cooking oil, an overflowing kitchen bin. When he reached the first floor, Granby was waiting outside his room. Frank jumped. Fuck's sake. Fright subsided into loathing. Granby knew what time he came in from work, had surreptitiously learned his movements by watching him from inside the building. When a tenant came out of their room, if he listened carefully, Frank would always hear the click of Granby's door on the 3rd floor. Like a spider behind a trapdoor, the landlord appeared to do little but watch his captives. Frank had never heard the murmur of a television or music coming from Granby's attic room, had never seen him prepare food in the sordid kitchen either, or even leave the building. The landlord was so thin he didn't appear to eat. "Right, mate," came the whispery voice out of the gloom. Granby's bony face, watery eyes and peg teeth were barely visible. The figure sniffed, was always sniffing hard up one nostril. Frank knew what was coming. "Need to speak with you about the rent, mate." Granby had no conversation beyond insincere small talk and attempts to scratch money from the people who barely existed within the building. Frank had come to wonder whether the Angel was an abandoned building that utility companies had forgotten to disconnect. Maybe Granby had assumed proprietorship of the rooms upstairs. Whatever was going on was some kind of dodge, and it contributed to his doubt that Granby had any right to charge rent for the squalid rooms. He'd once attempted to start a conversation with Granby, but the shifty creature never revealed any details about himself or the property beyond claiming that the Angel had been in the hands of his family for years. After deductions from his wage packet, Frank took home £900 a month. Nearly half of that went to Granby. Food took another 200, and credit card debt 100. That left 100 for transport. Frank saved as much of the remaining 100 as possible for a deposit on a room he hoped would be less wretched than the one he lived in at the Angel. ATM machines informed him he had saved £300, but Frank hadn't seen a bank statement in 4 months. He suspected Granby was opening his mail to learn about his finances, which would mean the lies he had told Granby about his savings his landlord would now be wise to. Granby must know about the 100 he saved each month and wanted it for himself. The small figure moved in front of his door as Frank released his keys from his jacket pocket. "Ain't just you, mate. Times is hard for all of us. But things go up, like, for everyone." The weasel's harassment was predictable. He had no idea how old Granby was. He could have been 30 or 60. His movements were agile, his voice wasn't aged, but his face was worn. The eyes had seen too much. The spirit inside them was blunted and only occasionally enlivened by feral intent when money was being discussed. Acquiring money was his only purpose. The same vulpine self-interest applied to the teeming millions in the city. But what was most remarkable or memorable about Granby's features was that they reminded Frank of a particular kind of working-class face, the type you saw leering out of a black and white photograph taken during the Second World War. Granby's face was not contemporary at all, but the white sport leisure wear and curly hair were utterly incongruous and made Granby look ridiculous. He was like a person from the 40s masquerading as someone from the 80s. That right. Frank's irritation cooled when he detected a tension in Granby's wiry arms and a narrowing around his eyes. When angry, Granby paled in a way that was horrible to behold. Resistance to Granby took things to a new level quickly. When his loquacious wheedling for money fell flat, physical confrontation never seemed far away. Frank suspected there was a great capacity for violence in the man. Granby communicated the sense that everything was at stake, that he would be ruined if Frank didn't meet his demands. Frank intended to leave the Angel anyway, and within 4 weeks. But 4 weeks was an eternity in the same building as a man determined to make life a condition of incremental blackmail, with insinuations of terrible consequences if his extortion was not placated. But, for once, Frank's inherent caution around unstable people took a back seat. "We've been through this before, Granby. There's no shower. 1 bathroom. Washing in a sink." Granby didn't like the disadvantages of the Angel being pointed out to him by the tenants. "Everyone has to put up with it, mate. That's life. What you think you should be in some top hotel for $100 a week you is having a laugh, mate. What improvements have been made that can justify another rent hike?" Granby was also a firm believer that if a conversation remained one-sided for long enough, then the tenant would see his point. His cocky voice rose to drown Frank out. He started bouncing on his heels like a wiry puppet or something much worse, a bantamweight boxer. "I gotta look after my family. My family's the most important thing in the world to me. If our personal financial situation is threatened, I tell you something, mate, I don't know what I'd do. What I'm capable of." Frank had never seen any evidence of this family. The hard-pressed family had initially been used as a sob story during the 2nd month of his tenancy, when Granby first asked him for more money with tears in his doleful eyes. Frank had only enjoyed 1 harassment-free month to get settled in. Something that also stank of a well-rehearsed tactic. What fucking family? Granby's fists clenched. Frank sensed they would feel like wooden hammers against his face. He lowered his voice but kept an edge in his tone. "There are 4 tenants in this building, all paying you £400 a month. For what? Half the lights don't work. The furniture's either totally wrecked or barely serviceable. My post isn't delivered. Or is it, and you've got nearly £2,000 a month coming in? For what?" "What you mean, £2,000 a month? That's got nothing to do with you." Granby started walking backwards and forwards. He took his white tracksuit top off, rolled his head around his shoulders as if preparing for physical exercise. Nothing. That's personal. Now you is going too far. There's no inventory. No contract. Cash in hand. Do you even have a right to collect money on this place? What you talking about? You're threatening me. You is threatening my family. You need to watch your move. I've warned you. I'm leaving. This last month's rent comes out of my deposit. You're going nowhere. 3 months' notice. We agreed. Sleep deprivation from night shifts, 3 hours a day travelling on the bus to and from work with a dark shabby room at the end of the journey, the ever-present sight of his clothes on the floor because there was no chest of drawers or wardrobe, the endless trips to the laundrette, the indifference of strangers being dead on his feet, never having any money, the fidgeting anxiety that accompanies failure like a crowd of persistent children, the cold terror about his future. All of this rose through him and became a terrible pressure. It would soon release in a steam he could no longer cap. We agreed 100 a month. In my 2nd month you try and hike the rent £25 a week. So am I to stay here for as long as you decide, while you keep upping the rent and making threats? Do I subjugate my life to your family's financial security? You don't scare me, Granby. 1 visit to the police, the DHSS, whoever, and your little operation's over. I bet you're signing on to, you've not done a day's work in your life, have you? By the time he'd finished, Frank knew he'd gone too far. He'd tripped every wire in the little man's mind by using off-piste words like subjugate, by subvulgar diction like rights, and adopting a sarcastic tone about the man having a family. There was no place for a concept like fairness at the Angel. The Angel was an extortion racket, run like a prison, and the tenants were inmates. Granby circled him. I gotta go. Get out my fucking way. He made for the stairs. "You is taking me for a cunt. A cunt, there'll be trouble. There'll be trouble if I don't go right now." At first Frank assumed Granby was all mouth about not being held responsible for his actions and was possibly backing off. And he felt triumphant, as if a bully had been faced down, a petty tyrant dethroned. But Granby's bloodless face and glassy eyes, the muttering of the lipless mouth, the repetition, also suggested that Frank had committed a terrible offence. Granby had just barked at him as if he were less than human. Cunt wasn't just a word to Granby, it was a statement of an unfairly conferred status, a belittling judgment. Frank's protest would surely be countered with the most severe reprisal. Frank understood this in a heartbeat. Once you'd taken someone like Granby for a cunt, anything could be done to you. That's what the word meant down here. In places like the Angel. He also had a suspicion that direct action, one-on-one, might not be Granby's style either. Frank's neck prickled at the thought of his throat being slit in the night. Or maybe the curly head would move swiftly through the dark, with peg teeth grinning, before the steel went deep into the meat as Frank bent over the sink to wash his armpits. What a time to realize this now. Frank's words could not be taken back or ameliorated. Granby had keys to his room. He should leave now. But what about his stuff? If he abandoned his CDs and books, they were gone forever. They were all he owned. And where could he go? Were there any couches he could borrow? 3 nights in a London hotel was his limit, so what came after? Look, Granby. Hang on. Granby was on the staircase and rising to the 2nd floor. Was he going back to his room to get a weapon? Recent news stories of people burned alive, of acid thrown in faces, of knifings, closed Frank's throat and made him feel sick. He wanted to make amends and hated himself for being craven. Granby's feet bumped up 2 flights of stairs. At the top of the house a door slammed. Frank let himself into his room. In less than a minute there came a gentle tapping at his locked door. Sat immobile on the end of his bed, Frank swallowed but failed to find his voice. Frank. It was the Irishman, Malcolm, an old decorator with haunted astigmatic eyes, who hung off the payphone in the entry most evenings, muttering into the plastic handset, usually in defense of his involvement in some protracted dispute that Frank only heard one side of. The 2 men were on nodding terms but rarely spoke despite sharing the 1st floor. London was that kind of place. The other tenants of the Angel were either uninterested in him or wary of a new arrival. Frank approached the door. What? He whispered back. "Can I speak with you?" "It's all right. Granby's back in his room." The insinuation that he was hiding from Granby behind a locked door made Frank ashamed. He opened the door. His hand trembled on the handle. "Can I speak with you?" The man's eyes looked in 2 directions, and the skin of his face was yellow-grey from smoking. The 1st floor reeked of hand-rolled cigarettes, amongst other things. Frank let his neighbor inside, closed the door and locked it as quietly as he could. The small man spent a few seconds looking about the room, studying the walls. There were no pictures, just wallpaper thick with paint the color of sour milk. There was little else to look at if you discounted unpacked boxes of possessions and the incongruous office chair before a sash window that overlooked a yard, the space filled with broken furniture. Without looking at Frank, the man said, "Oh, you're all right, son. For a few days. And he won't come down to sort you out. Don't operate like that here." "Then how does it operate?" The question was out of his mouth before he could consider it. Malcolm turned to face him. Frank didn't know which eye to look at. He chose the one that wasn't dead and bulgy and always directed at the floor. "You want to be careful, son. You don't want to mess with Granby. You might have a day or 2 to straighten this out, but not much more. I'm not letting him rob me. We agreed 100 a week. He tried. I know. I heard." So Frank held out his hands questioningly at the man's presence in his dismal room. If he'd just come to reiterate Granby's threats, he might as well leave. "Take it from one who knows, my friend. You best pay the man what he asks to avoid trouble. Serious trouble. He's very upset now. Frank opened his mouth to protest. Malcolm held up one thick-fingered hand. You have to adapt. You're with the angels now, my friend. The man's use of with confused Frank, as if his neighbor was suggesting had joined a community established around angels. With the angels was also a phrase that had an uncomfortable association with death. I'm leaving, so there won't be any trouble. Malcolm smiled. Oh, they won't let you leave, son. What do you mean? Granby can't stop me. No, true. But they'll come and find you to collect the debt. There is no debt. In your mind, son. But not in theirs. What, who's they? It's been decided. See if it hasn't, my friend. This is crazy. I'll tell you what I'll do. You've a good heart, son. I can tell. So I'll go and... No. I'm not mixed up in anything. I took a room, a piece of shit in a broken down building, and now I'm leaving it because I am being threatened. Simple. I wish it were, son. But at the Angel there are different rules, ones we've all had to learn. This is getting silly. Oh no, son, it's deadly serious. You can trust me on this. I shouldn't even be here. There'll be hell coming down those stairs if he knows I'm in here talking like this. The way the man mentioned the stairs made Frank's legs feel weak. He's bullying you all, robbing you. Oh, it ain't just Granby. No, son. It's those he has the ear of, if you know what I mean. I don't. The man whistled between what was left of his brown teeth and raised an eyebrow. Granby works for others. A bad lot. Very bad. He's the last of your worries. What, loan sharks? No. Worse than that, my friend. A family. A very old London family. Granby don't have much say in things. He just does favors for them. You mean organized crime? Like the Krays? No, son. I'm really not following. I appreciate the heads up, but... I'll tell you what. You give me the money and I'll go and see Granby about the disagreement. What? Before it gets out of hand. Frank shook his head. The old scratcher was trying to get a cut of Granby's scam. More threats from Granby delivered by a patsy. No way. I'm not giving you any money. I'm not frightened of him. Malcolm smiled at the lie. It's no place to go taking a stand, my friend. Not here. Won't get you anywhere. I've seen what happens. And as I said, it ain't him you need to worry about. Malcolm dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. It's them others he's got up there with him at the top of the house. They's running things. Always have done. Granby's a go-between, but he has their ear, like I said. Frank swallowed the lump in his throat that tried to shut his voice off. He's alone up there, surely. Malcolm shook his head, his expression grave. No, my friend. You don't want to go believing things like that. And it's best to keep them up there. Keep the peace, like. So. What? What do you mean they attack people, this family? When Granby came here he brought a bad lot with him. An old family that's been in this city a very long time. Long before Granby and most of them out there. The man waved one hand at the windows. This used to be a different place, I can tell you. Was once called the Jerusalem. Clean, good sort of people lived here. We used to drink in that bar when it was open. Even women lived here. But there's not been a woman here in 15 years. Not since they come and changed the name. It all went downhill when Granby brought them here. 15 years. You've lived here for 15 years. He nearly added Jesus Christ to add weight to his horror. 20, Malcolm said. Frank could see the man wasn't joking. I used to be upstairs. On the second floor. Better room. But Granby moved me down here. I couldn't pay enough, see. Frank slumped more than sat on his bed and tried to comprehend what the man was alluding to, some kind of hierarchy of favoritism connected to the rooms and rental rates. You mean? He couldn't form the words. What, son? He demoted you from the second floor, because you wouldn't pay more rent. Couldn't keep up with the cost. Down here I can manage. But think of this, son. You're on the first floor. Where can you go that's further down? There's no rooms on the ground floor. Nowhere to live. So you're already on your last life. Frank thought of the dusty, abandoned bar, then became irritated with himself for even considering the man's nonsense. Malcolm nodded. You can't afford to make enemies when you're already at the bottom. I can't believe you put up with this. Do the other two upstairs. Oh, guess we all keep to the rules, son. There's no other way. I've been here long enough to know that. Jimmy on the second floor still works in the city, and he's been here as long as me. He's the only one left who has. So why do you think a man like that lives in a place like this? You think he chooses to? Returning from night shifts, Frank often saw an elderly man in a suit. He always left the building early. They'd never spoken, and the man refused to meet his eye. How much does he pay? Frank's curiosity had taken over. That's between Jimmy and Granby. You never discuss money here. They don't like it. That was your first mistake. Oh, they don't like that. What a surprise. This just gets better and better. So some guy in finance is trapped here and has been shaken down by Granby for 15 years. Fuck's sake. This is unbelievable. What about the drag queen? Malcolm didn't return Frank's grin. The fella who dresses like a woman, Lillian. That's what he calls himself now. And that's a bad business right there, my friend. Oh, Lord. But it shows how bad it can get if Granby is upset about rent not being paid. Frank had caught sight of a frail and elderly crossdresser more times than he wished to remember, but never outside the building. A habitual haunter of the bathroom and its speckled mirror, the crossdresser often clattered around inside while Frank waited on the stairs to use the toilet. Lillian also played opera records and made the stairs stink of perfume. Frank didn't know anything else because they'd never spoken. The man may have once been a convincing female mimic as he was smallboned, but now looked haggard and was always drunk. He was an actor once, Malcolm said. What? Oh, yes. On the stage. West End. Long time ago. Work dried up and he couldn't keep up with Granby. That's when he made the change. To go on the hall. No. These days he sucks cocks down the Duchess to keep up with Granby. Frank started to grin. He was close to screaming with hysterical laughter. It's terrible. He lost everything. Now he drinks. He let this place get to him. But you can't afford to let it get to you. Never. You have to learn to adapt if you want to enjoy any kind of life here. This is how it is once they let you inside. Lily can't keep up with his rent now. He'll be the next to go unless he gets your room at the reduced rate. His visitor never intended the story to be amusing, but Frank couldn't stop grinning. Go, where will Lillian go if he doesn't get demoted into this shit-heap of a room? What I am trying to tell you is that I've known others here too who also thought like you and who held out on Granby. But they are not around now. Again, Malcolm dropped his voice to a whisper. But they never left either. He winked the eye Frank had been looking at. Granby will give anyone a few months to make arrangements, and you've had that. But then the collecting goes to others. And Granby don't like that because it makes him look bad. And they are all he's got going for him. If he can't collect, they have to get involved. They come down. You follow, and them coming down to sort things out makes them very angry at being disturbed. Angry at Granby, angry at us. And I'd guess we're close to that time now. He and his imaginary family up in the attic are not getting another penny from me. He'll be gone in 4 weeks or less. Oh, son, don't go getting ahead of yourself. There'll be no 4 weeks. Like I said, you have to pay now. That's how it works here. To keep them others up there. And no one leaves unless they say so. That's the arrangement. Frank had heard enough. Okay. I appreciate the advice. But I know a racket when I see one. This is bullshit. Do you honestly think I'll stay here and let myself get threatened maybe for 15 years while Granby takes my money, whacking up the rent whenever he wants to, and if I can't pay then I have to put on a friggin' dress? Christ almighty, what is wrong with you people? Frank briefly entertained an image of himself as an older man wearing a dress in the Duchess, wherever that was. He wanted to howl with laughter. He stood up and unlocked his door. Malcolm understood it was time to leave but hesitated. "You're in the Angel now. You're in their house." Yeah. Thanks. I get it. But no thanks." The old man stepped out of his room into the half-darkness of the corridor. The one begrimed window of the stairwell let a little light through. A silvery grey infusion illumined half of the decrepit old figure's silhouette, which stood perfectly still. Without blinking either of his mad eyes, Malcolm watched Frank's door close. Outside his room, Frank heard a trace of opera music. A muted fanfare. He shuddered. Night fell and Frank paced his room, from the windows to the radiator, back and forth. The carpet looked as if it had been worn down by the similar movements of previous inmates. Neither of his friends, Nigel or Mike, would help him out with a sofa to sleep on. Girlfriends were cited as reasons in both cases. Cheers. Frank had 12-hour shifts across the next 3 days, so looking for a room was not an option he could pursue in the morning. As a temp, he could not afford to lose the money by taking a day off work. He'd have to stick it out at the Angel for a few more days. Maybe return to his room late after work and keep a low profile for a bit. When the shift pattern concluded, he could find a new place and split. Worn out by his nerves and thoughts, Frank placed the office chair under the door handle and flopped onto his bed. Sleep came quickly. Sleep hectic with dreams. He saw a fat man stood by a window that opened above the pub's sign. The room must have been situated at the front of the building. The man fed pigeons and shouted "bitch, fucking bitch" at most of the women who passed in the street below. In another room similar to his own, an old man crawled in circles on the carpet. His false teeth were lost, and the host of a quiz show spoke about angels to him through the window of an old television. In a chaotic and nonsensical carousel of what resembled excerpts from a seemingly unending collection of ethereal footage, his own room was featured several times. The carpet was brighter and the walls not so sallow in each brief episode. In one scene he vividly dreamed of a bearded man with a thickly haired body lying on the bed. A yellow candlewick bedspread covered him to his stomach. In one hand he held a 2-liter bottle of vodka. The man stared at the ceiling with what looked like revulsion and terror. In another dream, a yoked drunk also appeared in the same bed. This time the mattress was partially covered by a tatty purple sleeping bag. The man sang a musical song while someone shouted "cunt" through the door. In that scene there was a strange sound too, with no visible source. It sounded like a large bird was stuck inside the room and was beating the walls with its wings. Either that or the creature was desperately trying to flap its way inside. Frank awoke and sat up in bed. His face was wet with tears. He was exhausted. Shaken by the dreams, he didn't go back to sleep. He got up and dressed in his security guard's uniform. It then took him a few minutes to summon enough courage to open the door of his room and to enter the dark passage outside. He urgently needed to empty his bladder. As he came out of the bathroom, and before his scrabbling fingers could locate the switch and turn the timed light back on, he realized that he was not alone in the corridor that passed between his room and Malcolm's. At first he thought the scuffling sound was being made by a dog, but thin bluish light falling through a sash window on the stairwell illumined something that was not a dog rising from the floor outside his room until it was standing on 2 thin legs. Someone frail with unkempt hair, perhaps an elderly woman. What may have been a nightgown fell to the form's scrawny knees, but the arms of the figure appeared to be too long for a person of any age, and behind it something that sounded like a pair of broken umbrellas was being shaken with fury and thrashed at the air. Frank whimpered and slapped the light on to reveal an empty corridor. Paper peeling from the walls, red skirting boards, faded green carpet, but no sign of life. He stood still, stunned. The thud of his heart filled his head. His thoughts groped for an explanation. The light clicked out, leaving him in the dark. At work, Frank was often stood before the plate-glass doors at the entrance of the residential building he guarded, staring at the forecourt of Clarendon House. Without really seeing the parked cars, he contemplated the hallucination and his dreams from the night before. He wondered if the building was some kind of hellish trap where alcoholics and the unstable came to die. Or maybe the actual building damaged the occupants enough for them to see things, to hallucinate. By the end of the afternoon, Head more or less convinced himself that the tourniquet of stress constricting his life had tightened and led to the dreams and the episode endured the night before. A growing sense of entrapment, Granby's threats of violence, and Malcolm's elliptical suggestions of a sinister family housed within the Angel had all played their part. The resulting strain had caused him to half-glimpse the remnant of a nightmare in a dingy, unlit corridor. After Frank clocked off, he whiled away 4 hours in Islington, sipping beer that he could ill afford to buy before making his way back to the Angel. At 10 p.m. he inched open the front door, removed his shoes and crept up to the first floor. He used the sides of the stairs to reduce the noise of his ascent. Despite his best efforts to move silently, once he reached his room, with his keys at the ready in one hand, he heard the distant sound of Granby's door opening 2 floors up. The idea of something slipping out of the attic room was too horrible to entertain, and Frank eschewed all attempts to keep quiet in his haste to get inside his room before locking the door behind him. From 10 o'clock until midnight, the total absence of Lily's opera music, the lack of a mutter from Malcolm's television, and no sign of any congress in the communal areas beyond his door, Frank interpreted as unwelcome signs of anticipation, if not apprehension, among the other occupants of the Angel. Something was about to happen, and the suggestion by his neighbour the previous evening that something would come down from the top of the house to collect rent from him no longer seemed as absurd to Frank as it had done during daylight hours. He managed to stay awake in the large silent building until 2 a.m. when sleep overcame him. At 4 a.m. he sat up with a small cry, convinced that the group of thin figures who were standing around his bed had actually come out of the dream with him and were now present at the bedside. He removed his hands from his face and sat still in the darkness. The figures from the dream faded quickly. Some ambient light from a distant street lamp distinguished his thin curtains from the surrounding walls. The rest of the room remained dark, which was galling because the sound of scratching from the wrong side of the ceiling directly above his bed was not something he could investigate with his wide-open, beseeching eyes. He turned sideways and scrabbled for the switch of the bedside lamp. He was so frightened, and his cringing among the bedclothes impeded his movement to such an extent that it seemed to take about a minute for him to get the lamp switched on. During the appalling wait for light, Head imagined that something was hanging from the ceiling by its feet, and that a face was no more than a few inches from his own. Moments before the room was lit, Head also heard the sound of determined wings beating against the plaster of the ceiling. Head imagined that an animal was struggling to squeeze back through a small hole. With the overhead light on, as well as the bedside lamp, the noise ceased. Frank could see that there was nothing on the ceiling either, and no evidence of any intrusion to account for the commotion above his bed. But he was left with an enduring fear that something within the building was now determined to show itself. He dressed hurriedly and picked up his wallet and phone. He'd leave the building and wait out the remainder of the night walking the streets if necessary, because that was infinitely preferable to staying inside the building. Frank never made the stairs. Once the door to his room was open, he became too afraid to enter the corridor. Out there, on the staircase, the air was being cracked by the sound of dry wings, the noise of a dirty pigeon rising from the greasy cement of Trafalgar Square, but 100 times louder. At the end of the passage, where a little light fell through the window over the stairwell, the silhouette was visible of someone who wasn't Malcolm, Jimmy, Lillian or Granby. Nor could Frank be certain that the wizened figure's feet were even touching the stairs. He lacked the presence of mind to speculate how it was possible for the figure to hover like that, as well as flicker in and out of his sight. The image appeared and then disappeared before the window. But whoever, or whatever, it was, the intruder was in a state of great agitation at the sight of him. What he could see of the form's outline shook a misshapen head about in the air. What might have been fingers at the end of the long arms repeatedly clenched into fists, then unclenched. The idea of turning the corridor light on and seeing the figure in more detail was something Frank found too unbearable to contemplate. Cringing inside his doorway, he only found his voice after had swallowed the constriction in his throat. Money. I'll get it. Please don't. The money. I'll get it. Somewhere upstairs in the house he heard Granby's voice over the sound of the beating wings. Cunt, 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 the man screamed in a kind of mantra as if he had entered into an animal frenzy, one part fury and one part intense sexual excitement at the thought of violence and blood within the wretched building. Frank was sure he was about to be torn apart by the thing on the stairs. Or, even worse, taken somewhere else that the building offered access to through the ceilings of its scruffy rooms. And it was at that point that enough clarity returned to his mind for him to make a suggestion, to offer a compromise to the noisy and foul air batting against his face. He was never sure whether he spoke, or whether his offer was a thought or even a prayer to this unnatural thing that was moving from the window and up to the ceiling of the first floor. But he closed his eyes and made a pledge that he would collect money on behalf of the thing before the window. And he boasted that he would be better at collecting than Granby ever had been. When a stench fouler than anything he had ever experienced engulfed his face and made him vomit onto his shoes a miasma that might have hung over a cluttered battlefield or a plague pit, Frank collapsed upon the hard carpet. What revived him was the commotion of the old wings moving upwards and through the centre of the stairwell. This noise was soon followed by a series of screams in the attic, human cries made amidst a terrible thumping, that of a solid object connecting with a wall, and with tremendous force. Gradually, the noises died away and silence returned to the building, a respite blessed to Frank's battered senses. When he got to his feet he knew what he had to do. The door to Granby's room was open, but Frank never entered. Instead, he peered inside from the doorway. Frank never turned the light on either. What he could see of the room was half-lit by the residual streetlight shining through the skylight. That was more than adequate. A ceiling sloped either side of a central roof beam. Bulging black bin bags covered the floor. The nearest bag was packed taut with bank notes. He assumed that all of the other bags were filled with money too. On the table under the window, wristwatches and items of jewelry glinted. In one corner of the room a large collection of shoes formed an ominous pile. In the centre of the room, as if adored by the congregation of rubbish sacks, 4 stone rectangles stood upright. Each short column had a small stone figure mounted upon it. Frank only glanced at the sculptures. He found himself unable to look upon them for longer than a second. But as he stood in the doorway he was in no doubt that they were rifling through his mind. Inside his thoughts he heard a flock of little wings. Being so close to the figures for so long must have driven Granby half-mad. Even though the inanimate quartet appeared to have been carven from rock and had since become rusticated by a great age, for a man with more intelligence and imagination than Granby, cohabitation with the figures would have been a guarantee of the fullest insanity. Merely being in their presence assured Frank of this. To withstand the angels for